Is there a pen or a pencil back there in those cups? Okay, everybody needs one of these. Oh, thank you. Okay. You may need it. Oh, you found it up there. Great, we've got one. And then everybody needs one of these. Did I pass any of these?
No, you didn't pass those on.
And
She's got them. It's coming.
it's coming. And there's, when you run out of them, which you will, the rest of them will be right here. So you can grab another sheet when you need it. So let's find out about glazes, okay? Oh, thank you. So, the definition of glazes. We're going to learn what glazes are. This is not something you need to memorize. This is something that you'll come to know with repetition and practice, okay? But, you know, glaze, how would you describe a glaze?
Liquid glass.
Liquid glass, right. It's that glassy coating on the outside of your ceramic. So what is it? What is a glaze? So it's made up of minerals. And so the minerals are, we break them out into 5 categories. First we start with silica. Silica makes glass. Silica makes glass. That's what it does. It turns it turns into glass at a certain temperature. The problem is that silica, left to its own devices all by itself, melts at 3,100 degrees Fahrenheit. So do our kilns. Our kilns will fall apart at that temperature. So we need to get the silica to melt at different temperatures. And to do that, the next component, number 2, is fluxes. Fluxes kind of sound like they are. They interact with the silica and make it melt. And depending on what temperature you want the glaze to melt at, you select a flux. Now we've done all that for you, that's all in here, but if you really get into ceramics, you're going to want to learn about this chemistry and how it works. It's again, you can learn it empirically by practicing and doing. And fluxes is where the real poetry is, right? Because we have at cone 10 we have fluxes like cone 10. Oh, I didn't tell you about cones. I should find some cones here. Let me find some cones. Here's some cones right here. This is why I keep saying cone, right? This is a cone pack. And you can see they're actually cones. And these are formulated to bend when we reach a certain maturity. And this is 9, 10, and 11. So Jason puts this in the kiln right by a peephole so he can see it during the firing. And as we reach cone 9, this starts to bend. And then he keeps really watching close because he wants to catch it when cone 10 is down. But cone 11 hasn't completely fallen yet, and that's because we're firing to cone 10. And these are the numbers that I say cone 10, and they don't exactly stand for a temperature. I do say cone 10 is about 2360 or something like that, but the reality is that cone 10 is a maturity. It's not a temperature. Maturity is temperature over time. This is really logical, right? If you put something, you've done this with baking. If you bake something at 300 degrees for an hour, that will reach a certain result. You could reach the same result by doing it at 350 degrees, maybe for 40 minutes, right? And that's the same with cones. The reason we need cones is because we can't just look at a thermometer in there that says, okay, it's 2,300 degrees, you need 60 more. Because what we need to know also is how long has it been at what temperatures over time. So the cones are formulated when it reaches that maturity, they bend. And that's why we say cone 10, cone 5, cone 4. And the 3 levels that we deal with most, we fire with cone 10, which is all the glazes I'm going to show you today. We fire at cone 5, we've talked about for the slip decorated pieces. And then we bisque at 06. Now we want to talk about the 0 for a minute, right? I said 06 or 06. So O is the same as a negative in mathematics. So and don't panic, it's not like, oh, I got math. It's not like that. It's a very simple idea that we have a list of intensities, right? And so we all know that -6 is smaller than -1, right? Does everybody understand that? So when you see a 0 in front of it, that means that it's a negative. So we fire at 06. So if I were going to follow, if we count from say 010, the next highest temperature would be 09, 08, 07, 06, 05, 04. So 06 is colder than 02. And 06 is colder than 1. Because there's no more negative, there's no 0 anymore. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So is that making sense? If you want to understand this clearer, right behind Don on the wall there is our Orton cone chart, right where Don is pointing there. And that has all of the temperatures in relationship to the cones. And you'll see that for every cone, there's 3 temperatures. That's crazy. What's that about? Well, that's saying, look, if you fire this fast, so many degrees per hour, you're gonna have to go to this temperature to get to cone 10. If you fire this fast, it'll go to this temperature. So it's just giving you 3 variations. Is that all making sense? Beautiful. Okay, so where were we? Silica makes glass, that's the glass former. And then we started to talk about we talked about fluxes, and cone 10 fluxes, Custer feldspar. What a beautiful sounding word, Custer feldspar. Another word for that, anybody know? Granite. Custer feldspar is granite. Can you believe that? You're going to come away with pieces in this class that are glazed by the Sierra Mountains. They're literally, your glass is made out of ground down Sierra Mountains granite. It's beautiful. But sometimes we use Cornwall stone, which is a granite we import from England, from Cornwall, England, right? Just pure poetry. And it gets better. As you drop down to cone 5, the most common flux is nepheline cyanide. I don't know what that means, but God, it sounds good.
It sounds
right?
bad.
Nepheline cyanide. Not cyanide, cyanide. I don't know, but just listen, nepheline cyanide. I could write a whole poem about that, for sure. And then we have things like, get down to 06, one of the most common, so the lower temperature, Gertzley borate. I mean, oh my God, I want to name my child Gertzley borate. Fortunately, that's not going to happen. But, okay, so those are all fluxes. So that's the second thing. We have silica, we have fluxes. The third most important ingredient is called a refractory. So you've got the silica, the fluxes turn it to glass, and now it's molten, it's going to start to want to run down the pot. So you want to hold it there. And so you fill the glaze material with something that won't melt. And at these temperatures, the thing that won't melt is alumina. And alumina is part of any clay body. Clay bodies are mostly silica and alumina. So in a glaze, you might throw in a little clay, and that'll get you both. So there'll be different kinds of clay in your glaze. Okay, so we have those 3, right? Glass former, we have a melter or flux, and we have a refractory, which is alumina, silica, alumina, and a variety of different materials. So those are the core 3 things that make a glaze. That will make you something that's kind of clear or milky. Now, what if you want a blue one? What if you want a blue one? People like blue. So, cobalt carbonate, cobalt oxide. Cobalt is a material that turns everything it looks at blue, just turns it blue. Can't do anything else. Copper carbonate. Now there we're getting some interesting things. Copper carbonate turns things green if it's fired in an oxidized environment, in an environment that has lots of oxygen. If it's fired in an environment that doesn't have oxygen, that has what we call a reduced environment, reduced oxygen, not much oxygen around, it turns red. And this, to blow your mind, and it blew my mind when it first happened to me, when you wood fire, which is we're going to do that this semester, you fire the ash from the wood has a lot of calcium in it, and when copper combines with calcium, it turns a bright turquoise. Bright turquoise. So that's an interesting, cobalt, it's going to be blue. No matter what you do to it, it's going to be blue. It's going to be blue. I call it the Sarah Palin of colorants. Because it doesn't matter what it experiences. It doesn't matter the truth of the world. It doesn't matter what's going on. You put cobalt in an electric kiln, it's blue. Put it in a high fire gas kiln, it's blue. Reduce it, it's blue. And put it in a wood fire, it's blue. Like Sarah Palin, no matter what situation she's in, she only sees things one way. That's it. But copper is quite a wide range of things. Iron oxide also. Give me another word for iron oxide.
Rust.
Rust, absolutely. That's what iron oxide is. It's iron oxidizing, rust. And copper is copper rust, basically. These oxidized forms of metal. So all the colorants are metallic oxides. And so these are the ingredients that we use when we're glazing. All right, so that's the colorants. And if you look behind you at that wall there, that board is filled with our glaze possibilities. And there's 144 possibilities there, so that's a lot. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, there's one more question we have, and there's other kinds of glaze ingredients, but I'm going to finish with the fifth one here, which we call an opacifier. And you've all experienced opacifiers. You've all worn opacifiers, right? If you've ever used sunscreen, you've put an opacifier on your skin. Opacifiers, the word opacifier comes from opaque, right? So you have three conditions. We'll break it down into three states, this whole continuum. Clear, like a plane of a glass window is clear. Translucent is like these covers on these lights. You can see, you can't see the light bulb exactly, but you can see through a little bit. That's translucent. And opaque is me. I'm opaque. Can't see through me at all, right? Well, some people say I see right through you. But anyway, so you get it. So opacifiers are primarily zinc or tin. And zinc is a very common ingredient in sunscreen. So far, you with me? Do you need to know this? Do you need to have it on the tip of your tongue? No, but if some of you are really kinds of people that learn through understanding what you're dealing with. Here, when I open this up, this is a beautiful glaze called peach strontium green, and I'm looking at this liquid. What this means, what this is, now you can look at that and you can say, well, I know there's silica in there, and I know there's alumina in there, and I know there's some kind of flux, probably custard feldspar because it's cone 10. Look at how smart you are already. And it's going to be green, so maybe it has copper in it. Another one would be chrome. It might have chrome in it. Same stuff on the car bumper, well, old car bumpers.
Just answer my question was how are we going to mix that?
Right. We mix it for you. But if we can get enough interest, we do have a class just in this, and you can learn all these things. By you don't make art so much, you just make little things to do tests with, and you just test and test and test, and you learn all of this. So there we go. So we get a sense of what's in these buckets, what these glazes are. Now we're going to start to learn about the glazing, right? So we have all these things can be glazed, and here's the buckets. Seems easy, right? We'll just glaze them. But let's start with kind of considering our glaze possibilities. Let's just take a step over here. This is like the multiplication tables, but again, it's not math. Don't panic, it's easy. So these are the names of all of our glazes that are in these buckets, right? Mm-hmm. In these large 30-gallon barrels. And as you look down here, we have Temaku, Ohata, Cranberry, Ken's Blue, Stoneware Blue, Lancet's Oribe, Peach Strontium Green, Celadon, Orange Carbon Trap Shino, Braze Shino, Honey Luster, Yellow Salt Matte, O'Reilly White, and Limestone Clear. Okay, that's a lot. I know shops that just, like schools that just have 3 glazes. We are not them. And then, right here, it's exactly the same list of glazes in the exact same order. That way, what you have here as a test tile is that we've taken one of the glazes and we've dipped it 2/3 of the way, and then we've taken the other glaze and we've dipped it 2/3 of the way, the other direction. So if you're looking at this, let's say I'm going to pick a middle stripe here. Ooh, that's really nice, right? So, but I'm going to move on from that one because that's complicated. Let's see which one. Oh, look at that. See how beautiful red that is? Let's find out what that is. That's unusual. That's red. That's lovely. I want that. So how do I make that? Well, I know if it's the middle stripe, it means it's an overlap. It's not just one glaze. So what's an overlap of? Well, we go down here, and it's Peach Strontium Green. that bucket we were looking at just a minute ago. And then I go over here, you gotta go the other way, and it's Celadon. Now see, it says second dip here, and it says first dip here. So all the ones that are listed on the bottom, they were the first one, and that's really important. So that means first I put down peat strontium green, and then over the top of it was Celadon, and then they melted together. So you might think, well, it doesn't matter because they just melt together, but it does matter. Let's just take a look. Let's find the other one. This is exactly the same combination. The only difference is that one of them's on top and one of them's on the bottom, right? It's pretty dramatic, don't you think, the difference? This is this beautiful kind of chartreuse green that's matte. This is glossy red. And they're exactly the same two glazes. So, as you're getting ready to glaze, you come and you study this and you say, well, what do I like? Okay, I like this one, or I like this one. Okay, what is it? Well, it's cranberry and lancet's orty-base. So you start to, and then which one goes on first? Do you see that?
Watch the bottom part there.
Okay, oh, and the bottom part. Oh, good. You're paying attention here. That's good. So there's another thing we have which is called overglazes or stains. And if you look on that shelf there, right in the bottom shelf, there's these little buckets right there. And you can see those are stains. And you can glaze a piece and then take a brush and paint patterns with those stains. And this will show you what those stains look like on each of the glazes that we have here. Good question. The questions are fabulous. They're really good. So, remember, I asked you to make some small pieces, right? Here's a hand-built small piece, here's a wheel-thrown small piece. I'm going to show you how to use these. This is how you're going to learn. First off, this is what you want to do to learn your glazes, right? So, you start with, so you want to start with your small pieces because, you know, you might make a beautiful lidded pot, right? Oh, I'm going to learn to glaze now. But glazing isn't, you know, it's a sensibility. Like if you get it too thick, it's going to run down to the shelf. If you get it too thin, it's going to be spotty. So you have to learn how to get the right thickness, and that takes practice. And that's what you're going to do is you're going to practice. So that's why we practice with. You want to practice with something you care a little bit about, but not a lot about, right? So that's what we're doing. So. So you want to keep your eyes open. This is really important. You want to keep your eyes open, and Jason's going to fire kilns. We're going to start to see these beautiful pieces coming out, and you know, Maddie is going to get a fabulous piece, and you're going to want to know what did she do because I want to do that. So you go to Maddie and you say, wow, what is that? You know, what did you do? And she's going to tell you, I use this glaze, and over the top I use this glaze, and you're going to take notes. If you don't take notes, you will not remember. And Maddie is going to be able to tell you because she takes notes, right? And that's what this page is for. This page is so that you can keep track of the syringe. I draw a little picture of the piece, what clay, what slips, what stains, and then how did I fire it, what kiln, what temperature, all of that. So then you know, and you have a whole record of that. So Maddie's going to keep notes. When I teach Raku, which is a special class where you can really manipulate glazes quickly and learn a lot about different glazes, I tell my students, if I ask them what glaze they used and they haven't written it down, I just hit their piece with a hammer. Right? Because you're not just working for you, you're working for the whole artist community. When you find something wonderful, you want to pass that on to everybody else. You have an obligation to know what you're doing. Not just for you, but for everybody. So, I've never really broken anything with a hammer. Don't tell anybody. So, so take notes, take notes, take notes, take notes. Now, I make something, it comes out of the kiln, and it is dog butt ugly. It is hideous. It is horrible. You look at it and go, oh my God, I think I'm feeling nauseous. So, you want to know what I did so that you don't do it, right? But don't come up to me and say, man, I've seen dog butts that are prettier than that. You don't say that. You just say, oh, that's interesting. What did you do? And you have a special section in your notebook that says, don't ever do this. And you write it down there, right? So that way, look at us. There were 22, 23 people. We're learning 23 times as fast as we would if we were by ourselves. So keep doing that. So ask. And then finally, you want to glaze pieces as they get bisqued. You don't want to just let them build up. Say, okay, I'm going to make as much as I can, and then at the end of class, I'm going to glaze them all. Because we still only have a certain number of kilns, and if everybody does that, we'll get totally choked up, and we won't get half of it fired. So you want to keep it moving along. Okay. So those are the basic conversations. So now we're going to actually learn how to glaze. And Ruby, you see that blue turntable there, that little blue wheel on my table? You see it? Could you bring it here for me? Thank you. Okay. I'm going to scroll over here real quick. We have liquid wax here. And there's lots of little brushes you can use. Right there. So the first step. Now this is going to be, this will be one of my test pieces. Right? So I've got test pieces. So what I'm going to do, great, bring that over here. Thank you so much. It's heavy, isn't it? It's deceptively heavy. The best ones, the Shimpo makes really good ones. So, put this here. So before I wax this, I'm going to use a little bit of stain. And this is so I can keep track.
Hey, Professor, what happens if you put the stain on top of the glaze once it dries?
That's the bottom row of all the test tiles. And you can take a look and it'll show you exactly what each stain looks like. Good question. But you can put stain on the bottom of your piece, and if you don't put too much, it won't stick. Stain is just water and the metallic oxide. In this case, it's water and rust. This is an iron oxide stain. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 1 dot here, 2 dots here, and 3 dots here. And that's how I will be able to tell what I'm doing, because I'll take notes and go 1 dot is this glaze, 2 dots is this glaze. So I'll show you how that works in your work. So that's what I've done with the iron oxide. Does that make sense? I'm just marking this so that I can use it. Now another rule is that we do not allow glaze within 1/4 inch of the bottom of our piece, so that it doesn't run on the shelves. Because glaze on the shelves is hard on the shelves. It can cause them to break, or we have to grind them and clean them. It's a lot of work. So we try to avoid that. So what we do is, this is liquid wax. This is called this is wax resist. And so I'm gonna paint it on the bottom, and I'm gonna paint it down 1/4 of an inch. Now, when I glaze it, there might be a little glaze that'll bead up on this wax, and then I just need to wipe it off with a sponge. And then it's ready to be fired. Hopefully when that dries, I'll be able to see the dots. Yeah, I can see them. So this is for a hand-built piece that has 3 feet, kind of a special thing. If you have a wheel-thrown piece with a foot, what you can do is just apply the wax this way. Now remember, you have to have the wax on the bottom and 1/4 of an inch down, and that's inside and outside of this foot. The other thing you need to know is anywhere the wax goes, no glaze will ever go. So it's actually also a decoration technique. You can use wax resist. The way I would use it though is I would glaze the whole piece with 1 glaze, then I would paint some patterns with wax resist, and then I would glaze the next piece. Then I put another glaze on it, and it'll not, so you'll have kind of an overlay of 2 different glazes. So it looks like that. But the other thing to remember is if you drip a piece of wax on here, or if you get wax on your fingers and you start to handle it, then your piece is going to have all kinds of ugly spots on it because the bare clay isn't going to be nearly as attractive as you want it to be. So this sits here in this corner. If you can't find any, we can get you some. Very important, once you have used a brush with wax, you need to wash it out right away. Because as long as it's wet, it's water soluble and the wax will wash right out. But if you leave it to dry, you can throw it out. It's done. It won't work as a brush anymore. It'll just be a big chunk of stuff. Okay, so now we're ready, and let's start. Now we have to do is mix up the glaze. So, what glaze shall I? I'm going to start with some Celadon. Let's see if I can find it. So we'll look here. What is Celadon? So one of the things you've got to think about, if I have this, remember this piece I showed you with the slip decoration, it's a combination of white slip with a brush texture on the inside, and then this is chartreuse, right? So if I want to see anything, I have to have a transparent or a translucent glaze, something that I can see through. An opaque glaze, which most of our glazes are, will just cover this up and it'll never matter that I did anything, right? So in this case, what I'm going to do is I have the translucent glaze, the transparent glaze is called limestone clear. The translucent glaze that we have is called Celadon. And Celadon, you may be familiar with that from Korean and Chinese and Japanese ceramics, but Celadon is a beautiful, pale, almost jade-like green, but it's translucent. So the Celadon is right here, and this is going to get a little loud. And you want to mix this up really well. And so this is a green glaze, right? Kind of blows your mind because it doesn't look green. That's because the colorant that makes green is iron oxide. It's weird. But iron, in 1% of iron will make a lovely Celadon in reduction, fired in reduction. I'm saying this stuff, don't worry about trying to retain all of it. You'll start to know this over time. But this is iron oxide at 1%. At 10% it makes black. But at 1% it makes a lovely green. So now we take a little mixing stick here. That's what we're going to use. It's on an electric drill. And it's going to mix things up. So we stick this in here. And we want to get it off the bottom and the sides because glaze always settles. Take the time to really see that glaze stir up and mix up. You can test it by just sticking your finger in. If your finger comes out coated, that's perfect. If your finger comes out, you can see your finger and it's just kind of clear, then the glaze didn't mix thoroughly. So everything, when you do anything with a tool, a brush, a cup, this mixer, then you clean it by sticking it in here in this big bucket here. And you just stir that around, and it cleans our stirring rod because our number one rule is do not contaminate the glazes. So we're not going to contaminate this glaze by taking a stirring thing that has another glaze on it and sticking it. We won't do that. So up here we have all kinds of really convenient cups, and I'll just take one of these. And there's lots of different ways to apply glaze. I'm going to show you. Notice there's no wax on this. Bad. No, it's not bad at all. The rule is the wax is an option. The wax is a choice. Sometimes it's more convenient to use wax. The central idea is that you can't have any glaze on the bottom. If you don't put any glaze on the bottom, you don't need wax, okay? So I'm just gonna take a little cup of this Celadon, and I'm gonna pour the middle, because that's the easiest way to get glaze in there. And the basic rule is that the longer that the glaze is in contact with the clay, the thicker your coat. So that's a pretty good coat, and that's one of the things you need to learn. How long do you keep the glaze in contact with the piece? In this case, I didn't rinse it first with yeah, it's clean, so that's good. But I didn't rinse it with water. I used to do that. But if you do that, you have to hold it longer, because it takes longer for the glaze to absorb. So now I'm going to dip this in and bring it. I can use the surface of the glaze to determine where it stops. And that is now glazed. If I wanted, I could glaze this inside, because this foot is 1/4 of an inch down. I don't want to do that. I don't care about that. But if I wanted to, I could. If the foot is closer than 1/4 of an inch, I can't glaze it. Now, see how quickly that dried? It hasn't dried at the lip, but it has dried everywhere else. Why hasn't it dried at the lip? See how it's wetter at the lip? Why is that?
Two times.
What's that?
You do it 2 times.
Well, right, because it's been dipped 2 times, and everything has gone that direction. So it's really soaked in more. But it's been long enough that when I turn it over, it's not going to drip. Well, I lied. There's a little drip there. So if you get a little drip, blow on it, and then that will melt evenly. Now, when you're done with a piece, you can go out here. Now, you can build them up. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to show you right away. When you're done with a piece,
Go outside.
you can put it on, this is the glaze shelf right here. And there's a lot of things going on here. There's a sign right here, right? It says make sure the bottom is clean of all glaze stain. Because if you put a piece on here and it's got glaze on the bottom, we won't fire it. We don't wipe your bottoms. Okay, I always like saying that. Keep your work moving through the process. Okay, what it doesn't say up here, but it should, is for all our shelves, no matter greenware, bisque, we have to be efficient. So this is not efficient. These are really in a bad place, because if I have an 8-foot piece, well, not 8 foot, but if I have a big piece, this is the only place I can put it, right? So these all have to move. Now, same thing here. When you glaze something, you need to put it as far back as it will go. And this is kind of cool that this is so poorly done out here, because that means I can demonstrate what we're supposed to do about it. And the other thing it means is that you can see why it's a problem to not put your piece where it belongs, because it gets handled more than once. I'm handling all these pieces. If I accidentally bump it, I could chip the glaze. But that's not my problem. You should put it in the right place first, right away. So that's happening there. This is happening here. So now I've cleared a lot of space. And these pieces, and I'll keep doing this until all of these pieces are here. And then I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to follow the rules. I want to put it on the lowest shelf that it'll fit on, and then move it as far back as it'll go. And that's great. So there's one. Okay, this is where your pieces go. Down here on this shelf is cone 5 only. Cone 5 only. So if you want to do that slip and then clear glaze, cone 5 clear glaze, you do it down there. You put it right on that shelf. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Let's go back in. Show you a few more things. And you can close that door because dang, it's cold.
It's not that cold. It's freezing. It's not.
If you look here, this is my little throne cut for test pieces, and I'm going to show you how to learn a lot. Go ahead and close the door when everybody's in. Good, thank you, Peter. So this is a piece, I've already got the wax on there, and I've got the 3 dots, right? So I find dot number 1, And I've got this one all mixed up, so let's use this one as a test. And I'm gonna come in here, and on the number 1 side, I'm just gonna dip that in. And put it out. So then, that's number 1. Then I'll do another glaze for number 2, another glaze for number 3, and they'll all overlap. So I'll have overlaps. And, what's that?
And you write it down.
And I'll write it down, thank you. And I'm gonna write it down, and I'm also gonna dip the lip. So, when I dip the lip, then I'm gonna have, how many different glaze combinations will I have with that? 6. Getting close, we're not gonna, keep going.
9.
So I have 6, right? So I have 3 glazes, 3 overlaps, and then I dip the lip. So I have 12. So I'm going to draw a little picture. I have a master's in fine arts, so this has got to be a really good picture. Oh my God. This is probably, I should just sell this. And then I'm going to write, now here for glazes and stuff, I'm going to write 1, 2, 3, lip. And 1 is celadon. And this, I'll just write small bowl. Because this bowl could be any size. So this is all I've got. Right? I'm tracking. Does everybody see that? Right? Okay. So now let's try another glaze. Well, let's see. Oh, look at that. Yeah, this is a good glaze to try. These 2, yeah. Okay, these 2. So these glazes have texture, right? So now I'm going to introduce you to another concept, which is the breaking glaze. The breaking glaze. We have some glazes that show you a different color when they're thin versus thick, right? Some of them quite dramatically. The Temaku glaze, which is a black glaze when it's thick and a brown glaze when it's thin, might look really nice on this bowl here, because if I get it the right thickness, and that's the big thing. If I make it too thick, it's all going to be black, and if I do make it too thin, it's mostly going to be brown. So I've got to find that happy medium. How do you know what the happy medium is? Any ideas how you learn that?
Practice.
That's right. Practice, practice, practice. There's a favorite story I really like, which is the story of, I'm just going to check here, see what we have here. And these might be better transparent. There's a story of The Little Prince. Did anybody read The Little Prince? Excuse my French. Anybody? Raise your hand if you've read it. Okay. So you remember, those of you who've read it, and the rest of you are about to learn now, the Little Prince meets a fox. Now the Little Prince comes from a planet where there is only him and a rose. His best friend is a rose. That's the entire flora and fauna of his planet. Him and a rose. And he is very happy with his best friend, the rose. He comes to Earth, and he gets so many different kinds of life forms, and he meets a fox. He finds a fox, and the fox runs away. And he's so confused. Why won't the fox be his friend? It's a kid's book, so it's really fun that way. So the fox wants to be his friend, and so what the fox, so he manages to yell to the fox, "Why are you running away? Why won't you be my friend?" And the fox says, "Il faut m'apprivoiser." Thank you for indulging me. That's French for "you have to tame me." You have to tame me. And the Little Prince, you know, he just has a rose. He has no idea what the concept of taming means. So he asks, what does that mean? And the fox says, well, tomorrow bring me a sandwich. And you come to the same meadow, and you show me the sandwich, and I stay on the other side of the meadow, and then I run away. The next day you bring me a sandwich, and you show it to me, and I will sniff from my side of the meadow, and then I will run away. The next day I'll walk halfway across the meadow before I run away. And the next day I'll come and I'll actually come close to you and sniff the sandwich. The next day I might lick it. The day after that I might take a little bite. And the day after that I'll take the sandwich and we'll be friends. You have to tame me. It's the same way. Some of these glazes, they do the same thing every time and there's no problem. Some of them you really have to tame, right? So you have to get to know them. There's no other way than doing the work. This is Temaku. Temaku, as I say, it's a Japanese glaze, also a Chinese glaze. So we're going to take this glaze. So now I have the Temaku here. There's a little cup here. Could use a little cleaner. Other glazes. You want to clean this stuff up really well so that I don't have to. Or anybody else. It's all about me. Okay. Okay. Here we go. So same process. We can pour, we can dip, we can brush. We have a spray booth. For some cases you might want to spray, and I can show you how to do that. But mostly it's pour, dip, and brush. If you're going to brush, you have to kind of brush it one way and then another way, at least 2 times, maybe 3 times, to get an appropriate thickness. So now, and again, if I don't, I could rinse this in water, but if I don't do that, I can, it just means that I can't leave the glaze in contact with the piece too long. As I let it stay in contact with the piece is going to get dark. It's going to get blacker. And then when I'm done, I pour it out, and now I'm going to do the outside. And I'm going to do that by dipping. And then I'm going to hold it right at the line I want it at. And again, I'm trying to figure out what's the, if I stay in too long, it gets so thick that it's going to drip. And if I don't stay in long enough, it's going to be mostly brown. So what I'm hoping for, and we'll see, I'll show it to you when it's done, I'm hoping for a clear brown line on all those textures and a brown line at the lip, the rest to be black. Questions, comments, thoughts so far? Yes, Pat, what do you got?
Can you like blow into it so that you can like knock off some of that glaze?
You saw me blow it to move the glaze from a drip. I don't want to get a strong drip, but you can't blow the glaze off. If I go, oh, I made a mistake. Then what I can do is scrape all the glaze off and wash all the glaze off. But if I wash all the glaze off, then I have to set it aside for at least a day because it's so wet it won't absorb anything. And then when it dries again, I can glaze it again. Yes?
Can you do, is it Mishima method? Mishima method for glazing as well?
Yes, you can do that. Let's say, the Mishima method is where you make patterns, you make indents and textures in the clay, and then you put, usually slip and then scrape it down. But in this case, what you could do is you could make the patterns bisque fire and then put a glaze in there and then wipe it off. And then the glaze would just be in the lines that you carved or the little dents and such. And then you need to put another glaze over that to get the rest of the clay glaze. Now, if you do that, that glaze has to be transparent, translucent, or have a strong reaction that's noticeable with the glaze that you have in those details, right? So, good questions. So now I'm going to flip this over, and I always go to look because there's sometimes a little drip here. There really isn't. It looks pretty good here. So that's beautiful. That's done. I'm just going to set it over here. We don't have to go outside in the cold again. Let that dry there. And then I'm going to take my little friend here because I'm building a little bit of a story about glazes here. So I'm finding the 2 dots, and I'm going to drop that in at the 2 dot level. I want to be careful. I have to leave a little bit of the previous glaze there. Over here, I have to leave room. I want to see all 3 glazes when I'm done, as well as the overlaps. So, now what do I do? Celeste, what do I do?
Write it down.
Yes, yes. See, I knew she'd know that. Okay, so now I take my... So, and I should write down a few other things too, right? I've been a little remiss here.
So can you remind us, when we did the underglazes, you said that they don't interact with each other,
Right.
is that right?
They don't, with underglazes, yeah, you'll get whatever's on top. Will be the final color. But you can, if you blend them, you will change their color and then use them.
If
right?
we blend them while they're liquid.
While they're liquid,
I
right.
see, okay. But to put one on top of the other doesn't have a reaction or anything, it's just whatever.
Right. So, let's see.
Are they kind of true? Like if you mixed a yellow and a blue, you get a green? If I wanted brown?
No, I'm glad you asked that. We have, like you just saw, if I mixed a green and a green, I got a red. What's that about? You saw that up there,
No, I
right?
mean these.
Oh, these.
The underglazes.
No, it's gonna vary, But if you use like white and black,
Yeah.
if you want a light blue, you can add white and that will work.
Okay.
If you want a dark blue, you add black and that will work. And, you know, you can experiment with the rest of it. The reason it doesn't always work, you can see this is what my notes are looking like now. The reason that it doesn't always work is because it's not a color blend. It's not like when you mix blue paint with yellow paint, what do you get?
Green.
Right, so you get green. And that's because it's light reflecting off. This, when you mix a blue glaze with a yellow glaze and you fire it, the chemicals are gonna blend and they're gonna decide, okay, what's this balance gonna make? And it's not about light, it's about the chemistry. Okay, so here's my bowl in progress here. So now, let's get stoneware blue. Stoneware blue is another breaking glaze, and because I have, notice how I always cover up the glaze when I'm done with it? I do not want to contaminate, cannot contaminate these glazes. Look around you. If you start being cavalier and dipping wet brushes into glazes or wet cups into glazes, you're ruining it for everybody. That's not nice. We're very nice. So, let's go, now I'm going to go to stoneware blue, which is right here. And the reason I'm going to use stoneware blue is because, these are all on wheels, so they move around nicely. Stoneware blue is a breaking glaze, and I want to use this texture. Now this one is our most breaking glaze. If it's very, very thin, it's really thin, too thin, it's like brown, like paper bag brown. A little bit thicker, and it's chartreuse. When you get it to the intended thickness, it turns into a matte powder blue color, like a robin's egg blue, matte blue. And when you get it thicker, too thick, it goes glossy and it turns navy blue. It's dramatic. So I'm gonna make good example. This glaze is a little more sluggish. It's a little thick, so I've been mixing for a while. Is it ready? No. Look at my fingers clear. If the glaze will not form a vortex, that kind of funnel, be very suspicious. You have to really mix it up. Almost. Getting better. It's not quite there. So that's good. So every glaze is different. So your job is to really get to know these glazes. That was kind of a workout. So far I haven't done any dipping. I can, I'll show you with one or two, I'll dip. I'll do a second dip. But let's just do one more single dip here. To get glaze on your hands, you can just use the sponge here. And where's that cup to wash?
In the sink.
What's that, in the sink?
Our shirt's right there by the iron and oxide.
Oh, very good, great, thank you. Okay, so again, I'm going to dip in and get some glaze and do the inside. And again, the length of time that it's in contact will determine the thickness. And here, the thickness is going to change the color. So in a bowl with this glaze, if I get it right on this part of the bowl, that it's a kind of a beautiful matte powder blue, it might get thicker as it runs down to the center and turn that into a turquoise blue right in the center. I mean a navy blue, dark glossy navy blue. So this one not only changes color, it changes texture. So it's a really good glaze for a piece with a lot of texture.
Is honey luster also a good glaze for different textures?
Honey luster. Honey luster has its own thing. The best way to answer it is to look at the test tiles on both up and down and see what it does. Honey luster by itself is not my favorite. It kind of reminds me, this will date me a little bit. But when I was a kid, there was a candy called Bit-O Honey, and it looked just like that honey luster glaze. But in combination, it does some really beautiful things, especially over the top of some glazes. So I'm just letting it dry, and I'll turn it over. This one will probably drip. Yeah, because it's taking longer to dry. I'm going to put it here. So I'm going to grab my test pot. Here it is. Oh, nope, not the
Red
other
one.
one.
Right here.
Right in front of me. Thank you. And grab this, and this is number 3. And just drop that in there. There we go. So you can see there's a little bit of glaze on the bottom, but it'll wipe right off because the bottom is waxed. So I have one more glaze to do to dip the lip, and I will do that momentarily. So, we have a Celadon going, right? So, let me just look over here. I use this all the time too. I can soak this. So, the Celadon is already mixed. And you have a little bit of a window. You have 15 minutes or so where you can count on the mix to still be working. So I'm going to close this one. So you first rinse it in the big bucket there, and then you can clear it up in the hose. The reason we wash all the glaze off here is some of those metals, some of the copper, the iron, we don't want that in our drinking water. We don't want to throw that out into. So what happens here is this settles out, and we have a team of people who come and collect that material and deal with it as a hazardous waste. It's not really hazardous, but we don't want to drink it. Well, it's kind of, not, I wouldn't drink it. So, you can see this is still glossy, so we're not going to be able to dip that lip until this dries. You never dip something in a second glaze until the first glaze has dried. So, let's see, what I want is peach strawberry green. So, could you roll that into that little slot over there? So, that one mixed up pretty easily. And now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few pieces. I'll get to you in a minute. Let's take a couple of these here. This one. Even a little bit more careful. So there was a place where my fingers had a little clay on them. There'll be a little bump. Alright, that's alright. So we take this, and I'm first going to glaze it with Celadon. And I'm making a choice here. I showed you that combination of peach strawberry green and Celadon. So I'm going to do a couple of Celadons real quick here. Because when I look at that combination, I think for these, what I'd like it to do is I'd like it to be kind of a Celadon color with a little flash of matte chartreuse at the lip. Or, if I want, I can go further than that. I'll show you that. Okay, Okay, so I've just done what you've seen me do before, and I'm going to show you just a few more things. I'll show you, and then we'll move on here. Oh, that's an interesting pattern. Do that one. Do that one. Let me see. Okay, that gives me a celadon surface. Let's see what I'm going to do with this in a minute while I wait for them to dry a little bit. And they have to be completely dry so we get them in another glaze. So now, let's see how this is doing. Yeah, that's good stuff, I think. We're just going to take this. Oh, whew, almost did that wrong. I just want to, this is celadon. No, I want to be strong. So, I'm going to just take that. So the lip is peat strontium green. This is my 12 glaze test. And not only am I testing how they do in overlap and what a drip looks like, but I am also learning how to manage the length of time that the glaze is in contact with my piece. So let's see, so I kind of stopped writing down celadon, Temmaku, and what's it? Stoneware blue. Thank you. Stoneware blue. And then the lip was peat strontium green. Now, when this is fired and I look at it, if I see a spot that I really like, I can look at the dots on the bottom and figure out what it is and my notes. If I see a spot that I really hate, I should also look and see what that is, right? Because that way I can avoid doing that. Now, let's take, here, you saw me make hand builders, I made these platters. Let me show you a neat trick here. You can use the surface of the glaze as a design technique. This gives me a very straight line. And you're saying to yourself, but Mark, you've glazed the bottom. That's terrible. But the reality is, before I put it on the shelf, I take a wet sponge and I just wipe the bottom of those feet and I'm good. It comes right off. You can, the point is, it's okay to get glaze on it. You just can't have glaze on it when it's time to fire it. And like I say, what'll happen if you make a mistake with one of these things, it'll end up right here. This is our whoop shelf right here. We'll clear this off and there'll be or up here. Somewhere here, oops, these cannot be fired until the problems are corrected. And Jason will put a little note in there saying, oh, the bottom needs to be wiped or something else. So you will get a notification about what the problem is. And I'll show you what I'm going to do here. So what I've done here, you see I left something bare. So when I dip this in the peat strontium green, then the bare part will just be peat strontium green, and the amount I overlap it will be that chartreuse color, and then it'll be celadon. So you can use the actual dipping process to get you a straight line across something that's really difficult. You couldn't paint that straight line. You can do it with the liquid. So now I'll take this one. It's got a lot of drippy things going on. We'll see how that. We'll use this one to show you what drips look like so I'm just going to take this and just dent it in, just a kiss. Kiss at the very top. And I want to hold this here until it dries a little bit because I don't want a drip to run into the rest of it. So. Okay. Don't touch the ends there. Good. Thank you. I'm totally using her. Terrible. So now I could also do this. That's quite a nice look, isn't it? Okay. Since I have two hands, now I'm going to take this one and do this. So there, that's going to be 3 different bands of color. That's good. Okay, so we've seen a lot. I could keep doing this, but there's lots of different things to show you. You'll learn them over time by observing and doing your own experiments. Are there any questions about what you've seen and what we've talked about? For sure. Yes,
You want
Leah.
us to all do the dots?
Yes, I want you to test glaze, because that's the best way. With these little ones, if you do 3, 4, 5 of those, not only will you practice learning how to apply glaze, but you'll see a range of possibilities that were not obvious to you originally. Yes.
So I remember there's like little tiles, test tiles. Can we
Yes.
also use that to test glaze as well?
Yes. You can do that if you want to try these glazes with test tiles. They're up here. And the thing that's interesting is that you want to use a test tile that's very close to the color of your clay. This is Neath. This is a white stoneware. Dawn 20, that's the beige, and so on. You can do that. So here, good questions. So a piece like this, how should I glaze that? I'm thinking transparent, clear. I'm going to do this with a clear glaze, and it should come out. And then this one, if you look at this, you can see when I wedged this up, I used different colored clays, and I was careful not to mix it up too carefully. So it's different colors. So if I put it clear on this, it might be interesting. Might not, but let's try it. So that's what I'll do with you. So each time, whatever you've done with the piece may indicate how best to glaze it. Okay. Another thing, if you're using more than one glaze on a piece, you don't want to glaze the whole piece one glaze and then glaze it all the way down with a second glaze, because it gets too thick and it will drip down and attach to the shelf. And there's two problems, of course. The shelf looks ugly and the shelf has to be chipped, and sometimes we lose the shelf, has to be ground down. But also, any glaze that leaves the bottom of your piece and touches the shelf, that's going to be a piece of glass when it cools down, and you're going to have to grind that off, and it's going to make your piece what we call in the business a second, because there's a flaw in it now, because it's going to be this rough ground edge. Okay, so we want to avoid that wherever we can. This will be a fun new thing. So as you get bisque pieces, so two things you're going to do right away. You're going to clear anything that you have on the drying shelf, you're going to put on the 2B bisque fired shelf. And then today, tomorrow, the next day, if you see anything of yours on the bisque shelf, you're going to come in here and glaze it. Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, so right now we're like learning the basics of glazing.
Right.
Are we gonna know how to go about if we wanted to do like intricate designs with glaze?
Well, there are some techniques for getting more intricate designs with glaze. Most of them involve doing it all in slip, because the beauty of slip is that it doesn't melt, or it stays where you put it, and then you put a clear glaze over it. There are ways to do things like there's a thing called glaze inlay. Okay, so follow me on this. Okay, I'll just describe it. You dip it in one glaze, then you paint a square over it. When it dries, you paint a square of liquid wax. When that dries, you carve any patterns that you want all the way through to the clay. So now the clay is exposed again. Then you paint a second glaze on top, just in that wax square, so it doesn't go anywhere but in the carvings. Now you have glaze inlay. right? And you can try that. Some of it might move and melt depending on the glazes, but that's one example. And you can, yeah.
How about like those mother pearl gold powders?
This is really a good question here. So now we're talking about mother of pearl overlays and gold, and they're not powders, they're called lusters, and you have to buy them separately. They come in little tiny vials like they're some kind of illegal drug, and they're very, very expensive, and they require a third very, very low temperature firing, about cone 022, very low temperature. So if you want to get into that, we would have to do special firing, and we're not opposed to that. So if you want to go down that path, you can explore that. This is now ready to be fired. You see that I've wiped the feet off with the sponge.
And how thick should the wipe off be? So that it
has to be completely wiped off and then down a 1/4 inch down the sides.
Got it.
So good. So remember, if you're going to dip, you got to keep the second and third dips up at the very top of the piece so it doesn't drip down and hit the shells. Okay, that is our demonstration. I have to catch up on my notes. I'm available for any other questions you might have.
What was the name of the transparent clear clay?
It's called limestone clear. Excellent. Okay, let's get back to work.